Hello and welcome to this YouTube training course on certifying the means of transport for long journeys according to Council Regulation 1/2005 that deals with the protection of animals during transport. It is offered to you by Tierschutzbund Zurich and Animal Welfare Foundation,
as well as Eyes on Animals.
My name is Thea and I am working on the field in this field for 18 years.
And my name is Leslie. I'm the director of Eyes on Animals, and I've been working as a transport inspector since 2001. But first, a quick introduction to the non-governmental organizations. Eyes on Animals and Animal Welfare Foundation Tierschutzbund Zurich are two organizations that send teams into the field to document the transport of live animals. They trail livestock trucks from point A to point B, often crossing many borders and sometimes even leaving the EU and entering third countries. The reason they do that is to document very clearly the behavior of the driver, if he's respecting his hours, if he's respecting the hours when he's to stop to give water and food to the animals, or when he's to stop to unload the animals at control posts. But we also do it to document the welfare conditions of the animals on board, and in particular, to check if the truck respects the requirements in the legislation. Is the truck equipped with all the necessary facilities to properly care for the animals during that long distance journey? Is the legislation being respected and well enforced? And with this information, we write reports, which we send to the authorities in member state countries and EU authorities in Brussels, but also to third country authorities, as well as to industry itself, to the actual players involved in the export or in the transport route, in the hope that we can move things forward. What's really important is to always focus on the details. Sometimes when you see a livestock truck, first glance, everything looks fine. But when you take a moment to really observe each animal and to really observe the different parts of the truck, one can quickly see problems that have either already arisen or that will probably arise. So we really take a close look at the details and report on them.
Besides the trailing of the live animal transports, we also offer trainings for the competent authorities, such as police force and veterinary inspectors. We are offering the trainings in different countries of the member states, such as Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Belgium. For the competent authorities to be able to perform or to inspect the welfare of the animals during journey, there must be, of course, a legal basis. The legal basis that covers the protection of the animals during journey or during transport is covered in Council Regulation 1/2005. The Council regulation is applicable directly to the all member state. And here is the article which is the most important, according to us, in the whole regulation, and that is Article 3, which, as you can see on the slide, and I will read it out now, says, no person should transport animals or cause animals to be transported in a way likely to cause injury or undue suffering to them. In addition, the following conditions shall be complied with. Now, the condition that we are going to see and look very closely, it's a condition described under letter C, which is connected directly to the means of transport. And it says, the means of transport are designed, constructed, maintained, and operated so as to avoid injury and suffering and ensure the safety of the animals. Further down into the regulation, we can also find Article 5, which again connects with the requirement of the means of transport, not directly but indirectly, and it says, no person shall contract or subcontract the transport of animals except to the transported authorized in accordance with article. In our case, we are very interested in Article 11.1. Article 11.1 deals with the transporters which are authorized according to the Type 2 transport authorization. This is the authorization which is issued to the transporter transporters that transport animals for more than 8 hours. These are the long journeys. In order to have the Type 2 transport authorization, the competent authority must also issue a so-called authorization for the means of transport, and this is the legal basis. So Article 11.1 says, the competent authority shall grant authorization to transporters carrying out long journeys upon application, provided that the applicants have submitted the following documents, and this is it: valid certificate of approval as provided for in Article 18.2 for all means of transport by road to be used for long journeys. The Article 18.2 is directly connected to the certificate of approval for means of transport by road used for long journeys. This article also states in its letter B that such means of transport by road needs to be inspected by the competent authority or body designated by a member state, and upon inspection, of course, they need to be found out to comply with the requirements of the Chapters 2 and Chapter 6 of the Annex 1. And now we are going to look in detail which are those requirements of Chapter 2 and Chapter 6, that especially the ones which needs to be detail checked, because maybe at the beginning when you just look at them you don't see the further down the road applications of the problems that in the future can apply directly to the animal welfare.
Indeed, all means of transport need to satisfy certain extra requirements. And here's a photo showing you a truck that's used for long-distance transport of animals, that's equipped with, for example, a navigation system, a temperature sensor, temperature monitors, extra water system, an automatic water system that can at any moment be turned on to provide liquid for the animals on board, an automatic fan system, etc. These things are all things that need to be checked by the competent authority or body designated before a certificate of means of transport be given out. And these checks are so important, as Taya said, to avoid suffering further down the road. If this check is not done properly at the beginning, the certificate is valid for several years, in which all sorts of animal welfare problems can take place. As well, if the certificate is given out too easily, and the police or veterinarians in another member state stop the truck and find problems, it's very difficult for them to enforce or to sanction if the competent authority in the country where the truck was approved has given a certificate out. For example, if a divider or a partition is not properly designed for the species on board or the water system, it can lead to animals being seriously injured or animals becoming dehydrated. So these checks are crucial for the welfare of the animals being loaded onto these trucks. During our training courses of police and competent authorities, we regularly stop livestock trucks and check them together. And even in 2016, we're noticing that almost all certificates of means of transport are set up that every species can be transported on the vehicle. As you'll see here, this is just one example, but it's allowing the transport of cattle and not giving any limitations to the age. So all cattle, all goats, all sheep, all pigs, and horses. But it's not possible for a truck to be designed to transport correctly all different species, because each species has different requirements. So it's very important that limitations be set in the certificate, or that a certificate be handed out as such only if really the truck is fulfilling all requirements of the Council regulation on the protection of animals. Here again, in another country, we're seeing certificates for the means of transport allowing all sorts of different animals: cattle, horses, pigs, sheep, goats, minks, rabbit, chinchilla. As soon as a truck is considered appropriate for all different species, it's important to keep in mind that that means there's going to be some sort of compromise for each species for its welfare during the journey. What could be an ideal water system or divider for, let's say, small animals such as pigs won't necessarily be the same type of design for large animals, such as cattle or horses. So it's important to look at the details and be sure that that water system or that partition is appropriate for the species that you're going to now indicate on the means of transport. And if it's not, then put the limitations down clearly in the certificate.
We are back to the legal basis. So as we said already before, and I'm going to repeat it with Leslie many times during this presentation, is, again, that the means of transport needs to be designed, constructed, maintained, and operated so to avoid injury and suffering and to ensure the safety of the animals. So we already said in the past that the transporter authorization type 2 can be issued just to the transporters when they present the certificate of approval of means of transport. The certificate of approval of means of transport is given out from by the competent authorities where the requirements of Chapter 2 and 6 of the Annex 1 are met. Now let's see in detail what the Chapter 2 of Annex 1 in point 1.1 requires. It requires means of transport, containers and their fittings shall be designed, constructed, maintained and operated so to letter A, avoid injury and suffering and to ensure the safety of the animals. So which parts of the road vehicle are directly connected to the well-being and safety and the avoidance of the injury on the animals transported? We divided them in 3 groups. First group is the use of the suitable partitions.
So now we're going to enter into the requirements of partitions. So as you know, the truck has to have partitions on board during long distance journeys. But it can't just be any partition. The partition has to be designed in a way, as Thea said, to ensure the safety of the animals and avoid all risk of injury. But we're seeing many trucks on the road still with partitions that are not solid to the ground, that pose a risk of animals falling down and then getting stuck underneath. And what is the welfare issue here? Animals that get stuck end up being trampled, but as well, they can never get up to get to the water or to the feed. So they either slowly die or suffer from physical injuries or from dehydration. Here are just some of the many examples we've taken in as recently as 2016 this year, also 2015. Here's a bovine that got stuck underneath the divider that was on a journey of over 6 days. And here's a horse that got stuck underneath the divider because it wasn't solid to the ground. It happens also to small animals. If there's a small gap, small animals can still fit underneath. Here's a calf that ended up dying during this journey. Again, a horse. And here on this slide, there's no animal stuck underneath, but there's definitely a risk. And that's that the divider is not solid to the sides or to the floor. In fact, in this case, there's a risk that the animal can get its leg stuck in the actual divider, and because of that, possibly fall or break its leg. And here on the next slide is a bovine that was just sleeping, but with its head underneath the divider. The risk here is that if it all of a sudden wants to get up, or if he all of a sudden wants to get up, he could hit his head badly, but over time, he could also start getting stuck underneath such a divider. So it's really important before you give the means of approval that you check what species can be loaded. If you decide that cattle can be loaded, that you check that the divider can go solid down to the floor, that there's no gaps. Wherever there are gaps on a truck, there's a chance for animals to get stuck. Here again, sometimes the skin gets rubbed off from dividers that aren't solid to the ground. But why is this happening? A lot of the trucks being approved still today are ones that are designed with the hope that all different species can be loaded. And of course, this is a temptation amongst the industry because if a truck can be used for different species, then you only have to buy one and you can offer your services to pig traders, to cattle traders, to sheep traders. But as we said earlier on, when trucks are designed in the hope that you can load a whole bunch of different species, there's often a compromise being made. And in this case, there are dividers that are being built that are short enough that you can load then 3 or even 4 levels on. But if you were to only load 2 levels in the case of adult cattle, then of course you're going to have dividers that aren't long enough to reach down to the floor. If they were built longer, then you could never put 3 floors or 4 floors. Physically, it would prevent that. And here's an example on this slide of one of those multi-species trucks where the divider is attached to the ceiling. And the red arrow shows you the gap that's going to be created if you were to set that truck on only 2 levels. If you were to set it on 3 levels, then of course the floor would be raised underneath high enough to seal that gap underneath the divider. But on 2 levels, you'll always have a large gap underneath. So in this case, if you were confronted with such a truck, you would check the partitions and then you would indicate on the the certificate of means of transport that it's not suitable for 2 floors. It's not suitable for adult cattle because of this. It needs to be loaded, it needs to be used only on 3 levels to be sure that the partition's solid and not posing any risk of injury with gaps protruding. Here's just a photo that we took during a training of truck drivers where we're showing, acceptable gaps and non-acceptable gaps. And when we loaded the cattle, the truck drivers saw, indeed, there's a large gap underneath, and it could not be used for adult cattle. But some transport companies are trying to solve that issue, and that's okay. They're getting extra metal sheets being built and welding them on to seal that gap. Or they can have mobile ones made that they bring with them. So on the days that they're not loading pigs on 3 levels, but instead adult cattle on 2 levels, they take out this mobile metal sheet and they fix it onto the bottom part of a divider to be able to seal it in the case of 2 levels. This is okay, but then when you were to give a certificate of means of approval for the transport, you would check that there's a mobile metal sheet available for the truck drivers to be able to install that before indicating adult cattle as being accepted to go on such a truck.
We talked now about the gaps underneath the divider, but there may be and can be also the gaps above the divider. In this case, as you can see on this slide, the divider is too short. So the adult bovines can easily jump over and get stuck with their legs over them. Here you can see again the divider that is too low and the young cattle, calves, being very vivid. When they are fighting and jumping inside the transport, they can jump and again get stuck over the divider. In this case, again, the manufacturers of the transport vehicles can, if they want, make a solution, and a truck can be approved for different species. For example, as you can see, this divider can be folded in half. So if the vehicle is used to transport animals on 3 levels, as shown on the upper left corner of the design of the drawing, then the dividers are folded down and are tall enough in order to prevent the animals jumping from one group to the other and to prevent them getting stuck. In the case that the animals would be transported on 2 levels, as shown by the graphic on the right side, then the dividers can be folded up and in this case also seal the gap that otherwise could present a danger of injury when the animal would jump over it. Here we can see how the foldable part of the divider is installed. It is very important with these dividers that they are easily to be used. So in this case they really are. This is indicated by the yellow arrow. So again, to summarize what we have said till now, means of transport can be approved for different species and can be approved for different categories of the species. but just in the case that is really constructed in such a way that does prevent the injuries of the animals loaded on them. So please, before approving the vehicle, check the partitions and determine if they are suitable according to the number of decks loaded. Specify the maximum and minimum number of decks to be loaded according to the species and of course to the category of the species. We have seen before, and we can also see by the two graphics at the bottom of this slide, that if the dividers are foldable or they can be reconstructed easily in order to make a 3-level vehicle be suitable for 2-level vehicle, this is directly connected with the category of the animals. So if this can be done, you can write, for example, adult or young bovines. But if this cannot be done, please specify, as is seen here under point 2, which category of bovines can be transported: adults, youngs, etc. Council Regulation 1/2005 also has specific requirements for specific species transported. Again, we are in Chapter 6 of Annex 1, which then furtherly legislates how the equida should be transported. This is connected with the partitions. Again, if we summarize, the partitions or the means of transport must be designed in a way to avoid injury and suffering to ensure the safety of the animals. Furtherly is this specified in Chapter 6, where in point 1.6 it says, individual stalls for equida except for mare traveling with their foals, and how this is then applied into the practice. Equida on long journeys needs to be transported in individual stalls, but as you can see on this slide, the stalls are made by the rubber blankets. This is not good, of course, because it does not serve the meaning. They can be torn, horses can bite with each other because they are too short, and this kind of partitions are completely not suitable. Such a truck cannot be authorized. Another slide with this, where the partitions are a little bit more fixed, but again they are rubber and they are absolutely too short. On this slide you can see some suitable partitions that can divide the vehicle in individual boxes. The partitions are solid, they are from top to the bottom, they can be easily opened, as if you recall before we talked that the partitions and the parts of the truck must be designed in such a way to be easily operated, so these partitions are easily operated. And when the horses are loaded, the partitions are high enough, as indicated here by the yellow arrow, to prevent the horses the interaction between each other. So if the horses are hostile to each other, they cannot bite, or also many times they become hostile because of the stress of the journey. Also, the partitions, as we said before, must be low enough to prevent the animal legs be stuck underneath them.
In Chapter 6 of Annex 1, they also continue to describe the requirements for the partitions. In 1.7, it says that the means of transport must be fitted with partitions so that separate compartments may be created, while providing all the animals with free access to water. That's important. If partitions are set up, the animal still has to be able to access the water, the automatic water system on board the truck. Additionally, it says that the fittings shall be designed for quick and easy operation, as Taya just mentioned. That's so that you can create smaller groups for animals that are hostile to each other or of different sexes, that it's not always fixed. The truck driver is able to change the types of compartments according to needs for that particular journey. Here's an example of a transport of horses, a long-distance journey, where a water bucket was hung on each divider to make sure that each horse has access to water during the journey. And here on this slide, you see the different fittings available on each deck of the truck so that the partitions can be mobile and can be set according to need of that journey. Here there's a photo of a truck driver installing one of the partitions according to his need. And notice that the partition is also solid to the floor, and the extra piece on the top has been set so that it's high enough for the species that he's about to load. And there it is installed. Here's a video showing you why it's so important that the partitions be able to be set according to the need of the journey, so at different places in the truck. In this case, the piglets were fighting very, very badly with each other. There are sometimes a few individual animals on the load that create fighting and make it very, very stressful for all the other animals on board. In this case, the truck driver could reset the mobile partitions so that the hostile animal creating the stress is separated from the rest of the group. This often happens when you load pigs on a farm, that some truck drivers are accidentally mixing groups, leading to fighting. It's important that you can keep the same groups on the farm as on the truck as much as possible to avoid fighting, which occurs, of course, when animals don't know each other yet. So if you can keep the same groups as they're used to, then this is, of course, ideal for their welfare. But it requires mobile partitions that are easy to operate and install. This is a truck that we stopped in Hungary, and it was well equipped. They were transporting gilts together with boars for breeding. And thanks to partitions that were mobile, they were able to make compartments for the gilts separate from the boars. So here are the gilts. They're all calm. They've got no disturbances from the breeding boars on board. And here were the smaller compartments that they were creating to stall the boars individually. And here's one of the breeding boars individually in his compartment that avoids all fighting and stress. The only negative thing about this case, though, was that the compartments made for the breeding boars were too small. This boar had no space to turn around, and one of its legs was being squished as well. So that's not acceptable. The surface area in this case was unacceptable. The mobile partition should have been moved slightly to provide that boar with more space. But at least the boars were separated from each other, which is required by the law. So as I just mentioned, it's a requirement of the law to separate animals that are hostile to each other or that are of different sexes. And that's specified clearly in the legislation underneath Chapter 6 of Annex 1, 1.8. The partition should be constructed in such a way so that the size of the compartment can be adapted to the specific requirements and to the type, size, and number of animals. So there's a legal basis for insisting, when you give the certificate of means of approval of the transport truck, that partitions be not only present, but be constructed in a way to ensure the safety and pose no risk of injury, but also be mobile and easy to operate. And again, like we said earlier, there has to be still free access to water, even when compartments are made in different sizes with the partition. So in this case, the breeding boars that you saw earlier, they were in individual stalls, which was good thanks to mobile partitions, but water nipples were presented in every single individual stall for the boars. Because of course, all animals have to have access to water during long journeys. There is a best practice that we've seen for the transport of bulls. Often bulls that don't know each other, they'll mount each other. Sometimes you have that also among cows. So it's important that they have enough headspace for adequate ventilation and to be able to stand in a normal position, but not too much space that they risk jumping on each other and causing serious injury and stress among the group. So this one transport company that we stopped had a mobile roof, sort of grid that could be placed at different levels. And they would use it when they transported bulls that were unfamiliar with each other in order to physically prevent them from being able to jump on each other. And this is really good best practice.
Just let us quickly summarize the legal requirements and the legal basis of the next chapter. So as we said earlier, Article 3 specified that the animals must be transported in a way that does not cause them any injury or undue suffering. In addition, the following conditions shall be complied with. Letter C is directly connected to the means of transport that needs to be designed, constructed, and maintained and operated so as to avoid injury and suffering and ensure the safety of the animals. This then is furtherly connected with the Article 18.2, which says that for issuing of the certificate of approval for road vehicles for long journeys, the vehicles must comply with chapters 2 and 6 of the attachment 1. Let's go now again to the chapter 2.1.1, which in the letter A says, again, avoid injury and suffering to ensure the safety of the animals. We have divided three components of the construction of the road vehicle that are directly connected to the avoidance of the injury of suffering. We have already covered the partition part. Now we are going to deal with loading and unloading equipment. It is furtherly specified the requirements of unloading and loading equipment in the Article 3.d. It says, the loading and unloading facilities are adequately designed, constructed, maintained, and operated so as to avoid injury and suffering and to ensure the safety of the animals. This is then connected with Annex 1, Chapter 2.1.1. Avoid the injury and suffering to ensure the safety of the animals is the requirement of the letter A, but then the requirement of the letter D, it says, prevents the animals from escaping or falling, and this is then applied to the use of the loading and unloading equipment. In this slide you can see that the loading and unloading equipment does pose the risk of falling down and escaping of the animals, as indicated by the yellow arrow. In this slide you can see a suitable loading and unloading equipment which has side protection, and also it has the grits on the floor that prevents slippering and then further injury to the animal.
We're now going to move on to the next chapter. Again, Article 3, that specifies that the vehicle has to be set up in a way to avoid all injury or undue suffering to the animals, that it be designed, constructed, maintained, and operated as such. In regards to Article 18.2 of the EC regulation, Chapters 2 and 6 of Annex 1 are applicable, as Taya already mentioned many times. The vehicle really must be designed in all manners to avoid injury and suffering and to ensure the safety of the animals. But now, how does this apply to hydraulic floors? We're now going to enter into the details of hydraulic floors and what to look out for to make sure that they're not designed in a way that can pose any kind of risk of injury to the animals when they're loaded. Unfortunately, many livestock trucks are still being constructed in a way where there's a risk for animals, particularly small animals such as lambs and piglets, but also in certain cases adult pigs and sheep, get their legs caught in between the floor and the side of the vehicle. And recently, most manufacturers of trucks have now taken measures to avoid this problem by installing lips around the whole floor of each deck on the truck. Here you'll see with the yellow arrow what we mean by lip. It's high enough and it's on a slant so that any animal that may have one of its legs on that lip, there's no risk of the animal getting caught because the leg automatically slides back down onto the floor where it should remain. Nevertheless, it's still very important that two truck drivers, or a truck driver and the farmer, or at least two people check both sides of the floor when the hydraulic floors are being raised or put down. So it's very important when you check on the vehicle, before you give it a certificate of approval, that there be a lip all around the floor of each deck. Here you see a pig that also got its leg caught in between the ventilation bars because there was no lip on the floor of this truck. One thing that can be done to prevent these kinds of injuries are by having the truck sent to a manufacturing company to install these sorts of grid panels on the inside. And that seals up any large gaps where small animals can get their legs caught. Mind you, these things are not ideal in summer conditions because they drastically restrict air circulation. So in the hot summer months, it's better not to have these. But in the winter months, it's a good idea to have trucks that are used for smaller animals be equipped with these grids. And that can easily be done at a manufacturing company. This was a real case that occurred a couple years ago, where a truck was used on 3 decks to load sheep, and a lot of the legs were caught, and the animals were suffering very, very badly on board this truck. Luckily, it was stopped by the English authorities, and the animals were all unloaded. But why did this happen? Well, this vehicle was actually designed for all species, but again, as we mentioned earlier, that means there's a compromise. This vehicle should only have been used on 2 levels, because when the decks are set on 3 levels, the middle deck, the floor of it, was set at the same level as the open ventilation gaps along the side. And for small animals, that poses a huge danger, as you can see in this photo. We had sent a complaint to the French authorities where the vehicle had been registered, and indeed they had switched the certificate of means of approval and specified directly in it that it was only to be used for the transport of larger animals on 2 decks, or smaller animals on 2 decks, but never with a deck set in the middle of the vehicle with small animals on board.
How come a transporter can transport with the certificate of approval of means of transport for road for long journeys on unsuitable vehicles? Well, the practice has shown, as we have seen in the field, that some transporters are very sneaky or creative. So since the certificate of approval in point 1 requires just the license plate number, of course the license plates are movable and can be switched from one vehicle to another vehicle. In order to save money, we guess, then the transporters can use the same license plate number, which is approved for certain species with many different unsuitable vehicles. In order to prevent this, we do strongly suggest that in addition to the license plate number, you indicate also the chassis number, or so-called vehicle identification number, which is specific to each vehicle, to a trailer, to a lorry. In this case, it is much more difficult for a transporter to be creative with the use of the certificate of approval of means of transport.
Yeah, and as Taya said, that's important as well, because the certificate of means of approval of the transport truck is valid for 5 years. So in between those 5 years, yeah, anything can happen. The transporter can get creative. But with the chassis number, it definitely decreases the risk of creative behavior among transport companies. But one can also specify underneath point 3 that the vehicle only be authorized for the use of 2 decks. And not more. That allows also police and competent authorities in other countries that may stop that truck along the road to be able to enforce the legislation if they see that it's being used on 3 levels, and then check this means of approval and realize that the competent authority of the country where the vehicle was registered or approved, that they had already specified maximum 2 levels. They can say to the transport company, you use that vehicle in an incorrect manner. The maximum was 2 levels and you're using it for 3, and it can be sanctioned and stopped right away. If that is missing, it poses a serious difficulty for enforcement in another country. So it's important that this means of approval, the certificate, be as detailed as possible and limitations be set clearly.
Let's move on to the next requirement. We will again just very quickly summarize the legislation basis. Again, Article 3, which in letter C, it's directly connected to the construction of the transport vehicles. Then this is connected to the Article 18.2, which requires that the Chapter 2 and 6 of the Annex 1 are checked when issuing the certificate of approval for means of transport for long journeys. Chapter 2.1.1 thus in letter A specify that the vehicle must be constructed to avoid injury and suffering and to ensure the safety of the animals. Furtherly, in letter F, it also states that the road transport vehicle must provide access to the animals to allow them to be inspected and cared for. In connection with Annex 1, Chapter 1, Point 4 requires that when animals fall ill or are injured during transport, they shall be separated from the others and received first aid treatment as soon as possible. So now, we are in Chapter 1 of the Annex 1, which is not directly connected to the Article 18, which states Chapter 2 and Chapter 6 should be inspected in order to give the certificate of approval of means of transport. But this is indirectly connected because the driver, during the journey, when he sees an animal falling down, giving birth, or that the animal needs whatever need treatment and first aid, he must be able to do this. And this is where it is connected with the letter F that we have talked about earlier, the direct access to the animals to allow them to be inspected and cared for. So, again, the construction of the road vehicle must be such that it's easy to inspect. It can also means view the animals' transport on the board of the vehicle and to provide them the first aid. So the access to all animals in each compartment is of vital importance.
There are so many reasons why access to animals during transport is crucial. One of them is to clean the automatic water troughs. How many times do these automatic water troughs become filthy during long-distance journeys? These are just a few photos and videos that we've taken in the past few months of animals being transported over long distances during the summer, where the automatic water troughs were so filthy that no animal would ever drink from them. In certain cases, there were access doors beside the water troughs in which the truck drivers could then reach in with their hands and clean the troughs, allowing the animals to drink. But if there are no access doors, then these filthy water systems stay filthy during the whole journey. The only opportunity to clean them would be by arriving at a control post or at the destination and unloading the animals first. But it's crucial that they be regularly cleaned. Sometimes just after a few hours of transport, the water troughs look like this. So during every break, the truck driver is obligated to check on the animals and to check that the water is clean and fresh and drinkable for the animals. Sometimes it's not just manure that gets collected in the water troughs, but also straw or bedding due to the wind when the vehicle is on the road. And here are some photos showing truck drivers opening the access doors and cleaning out the water troughs. But no matter how competent a truck driver is, if the truck is not designed properly, then he's limited in how competent he can behave. Without access, animals are really at risk of dehydration during transport because water troughs, particularly for cattle, become very, very filthy during long-distance journeys. But access is also important to be able to adequately feed the animals and make sure that each animal gets food. So rather than just dropping a whole lot of hay in the front section, one needs to do it in each compartment and make sure also the submissive animals get towards the food. So properly distributing the hay throughout the whole vehicle. During long-distance transport of cattle, it's important that animals don't just have access to the automatic water troughs, but also be manually watered. That's important because often only dominant animals get to the automatic water troughs because they're only available in certain areas of the truck, and submissive ones often don't approach them or aren't allowed to approach them. So manually watering animals through access doors means that the truck driver has the ability to check that each animal, also the submissive ones or the ones showing weakness, are given enough water during the journey. And this can, of course, only be done via acceptable access doors to each compartment. Here are just some photos of us helping truck drivers give hay and water buckets to the animals. Notice that on the photo on the left, there's an access door also on the top deck. It's important that there be an access door to each compartment because, of course, the animals above also need water. The safety of the truck driver is also important. Sometimes the doors are very small and then it's awkward to get the bucket in or it's awkward to remove the bucket. So it'd be important that the doors be at the right height and the right size that the truck driver can quickly present the bucket to the animals and quickly remove the bucket. Another reason why access is so crucial is so that veterinarians or truck drivers can access the animals and provide first aid. For example, in this case, a sow was being transported that fell ill during the long distance journey, and a veterinarian was called in by the transport company and the police that actually stopped this truck, and he was able to get in and euthanize the sow. If he had had no access to that animal, it would have been impossible to provide first aid to the sow. And again, here, another example. A cow was feeling unwell on this truck. It was a pregnant heifer, and a veterinarian was called in by the truck driver, and he was able to access the cow directly through an access door and provide an infusion. And thanks to that, she was feeling a lot better later and survived the trip. Here again, a calf from Austria being transported to Turkey that had serious problems coping with the drastic change in temperature, that was having trouble breathing. And a veterinarian was called in, and he was able to get into the truck right away and provide treatment to the calf. These things would all not have been possible if there was no access, because in many cases there is no control post nearby to bring the animals to and unload them. There may be one 300 kilometers away, but that's too late for the animals, and the law requires as soon as possible to give the animals first aid and separation of the animal. And that's only possible if one can easily get onto the truck and access them to do so. Here's a truck driver that was stuck for many days at a border crossing. He was not allowed to continue, and some of his sheep became very, very unwell. There was no possibility to unload them, but thanks to access, the truck driver was able to get in and humanely slaughter one animal on board that was in a horrible state. If not, these animals would have been left to suffer for days. Here's a video showing you the importance of access to young calves on board. Sometimes calves will fall down and become trampled. It's important the truck driver be able to get in to raise them back on their feet before it's too late.
Good job.
Sometimes sheep give birth on the truck. It's important to access the animals to be able to separate the young.
We found 4 tiny lambs who'd been born on this truck while it waited.
If not, they get trampled to death, as seen as this slide.
We do see on the roads more and more trucks that are authorized, and they do not have direct access to the animals transported, or the access doors are too small. This is few examples of such trucks. So as you can see, the access in these trucks is too small. So a person can barely fit in, and of course, he or she cannot climb into the different compartments of where the animals are transported in order to provide first aid to the animals.
Some trucks are actually being built nowadays without any access at all via the sides. They're completely closed, air-conditioned trucks. When these trucks are loaded on boats, for example, there's a serious problem because then there's not even access to the back. Some of them are being equipped with video surveillance, which is a step in the right direction, but it cannot be considered as adequate because you can only see each animal clearly if very few animals are loaded and only on one deck. But normally they look like this. And it would be impossible to tell if an animal was trampled underneath or if an animal was feeling unwell with just video surveillance. As well, in most video surveillance, you cannot hear an animal. And some animals will voice or give signals when they're not feeling well. So you need to be able to hear them to properly inspect them.
Ja, die staan er bovenop.
It has been argued that these animals can be accessed through the back door, but as we said earlier, when the closed truck is loaded on a boat, then there's no opportunity to access the animals through the back door. But it's also impossible to access the animals in the front part of the trailer because no truck driver or veterinarian is going to be willing to access through the back and then crawl on floors that are not very high. They'd have to get down on their knees and somehow get through the partitions to access the door in the front. Plus, it's not always safe to do that. Pigs will often bite, and you're surrounded by tons of animals, and the opportunity to get out quickly is also seriously limited if you're going through the back. So here's an example of a force-ventilated truck with just very tiny doors on the side where the fans are, but that you can technically open to quickly look at the animals, but you can't get in because they're too small. So if a pig was feeling unwell on the third floor at the top, right behind the cabin, it would be impossible to access that animal and euthanize him or give him first aid, as we saw earlier in a truck where there was good access and the veterinarian got in to euthanize the animal. Recently, there was a very bad truck accident with one of these force-ventilated vehicles. On board were pigs, and it was so difficult to handle this truck accident because the animals were suffocating, not just because they were trampled upon each other, but because the whole system is automatic and there was no fresh air coming in. So they were suffocating from lack of air. And in the end, the fire brigade had to be called in to drill holes through the side to get air to the animals. So already a truck accident is creating welfare problems, but with these closed vehicles, the welfare problems become much more serious and it's much more difficult to react correctly.
The legislation does apply to the means of transport, but also to the containers and their fittings. It says that they should be designed, constructed, and maintained and operated so, if we summarize from before, provide access to the animals to allow them to be inspected and cared for. Further down in the presentation, we will discuss how also the containers in which the animals are transported needs to have the access to the animals and why this is so important.
Yeah, indeed. As Taya just mentioned, it's not just the entire truck that needs to provide access to the animals, but also its containers. But that's largely been ignored by industry, but sadly also by law enforcers. Almost all poultry and rabbits are being transported in containers or crates where there is no access to animals. Once they're stacked onto the flatbed trucks, they're literally prisoners to their containers. And access to them is also important because one can provide relief to their suffering quickly if there had been access. Broilers are often found lying on their backs. They're very chest heavy, and if they're loaded incorrectly, they remain lying on their backs during the whole journey and can die from it. And these birds are all still alive, but they're suffering. We've worked now with several plastic crate companies and chicken processors and chicken transport companies. And now there's a crate on the market that provides access via side doors. Mind you, that's only for the crates that are stacked on the outer columns of the vehicle. The ones in the middle are still prisoners, but it's a step in the right direction. The problem remains that poultry trucks always have animals stacked in the middle. But this truck we saw, it's short distance and it was taken in Turkey. But it does have a lot of potential because there's access to animals on both sides. There's no animals, there's no chickens as prisoners in the middle. And it also provides extra ventilation, of course. Here's from the front where you see access doors to every single container. But there's also a transport company or chicken processing company now making access doors for broiler containers. And this is really good. It's not just a best practice, as we explained earlier, it's a legal requirement. It's just not yet been put into practice, but it needs to be put into practice. So we need to get more and more of these containers and crates with access doors being used.
Let's move forward to other requirements which are directly connected with the authorization or the getting of the certificate of approval for road vehicles for long journeys. Again, Article 3, this time letter H. It says, Water, feed, and rest are offered to animals at suitable intervals and are appropriate in quality and quantity to their species. Further down, Article 18, which is connected with what checks should be performed in order to issue the certificate of approval for road vehicles for long journeys, it says chapters 2 and 6 of Annex 1. Not to tell it again, let's move to Annex 1, Chapter 6.2.2, which is connected directly to the watering devices. And it says, the watering devices shall be in good working order and be appropriately designed and positions for the categories of animals to be watered on board of the vehicle. So this article is directly connected with the categories, not species, but the category of the animals to be watered on the board of the vehicle.
And maybe we should specify what category means in this case.
Yeah, category means different ages of the animals transported. So, the construction of the water supply equipment, it's then directly connected and is vital, and it's of vital importance to ensure the adequate watering of the animals transported in each compartment. What does the construction of the water supply means? It means that the animal, the category of the animal, for example, unweaned animal, it's one category of the animal transported. So the unweaned animals, they need to know how to use the water supply system installed on the vehicle. Till now, and I have been working for 18 years, and Leslie, you too, right? Yeah, we have never ever saw a road transport vehicle that we could say the water supply system is suitable to be used for unweaned animals.
As Taya mentioned, indeed, it's impossible to properly give liquid to unweaned animals on board of a vehicle. First of all, water or electrolyte are not the ideal foods or liquids to give unweaned animals. They're meant to be drinking milk at that age or milk replacement. Second of all, the liquid cannot be heated on board of a vehicle, and they need warmed liquid. The other problem is that some calves may figure out how to use a water nipple, but then absorb way too much liquid, and the other ones never can figure out how to use a nipple. So one gets horribly sick from consuming too much, remains fiddling with the water system, and the others don't even know that it exists. But the main problem is that metal water nipples are not suited to the physiology of the calf or the lamb. They're meant to suck. They need nipples to suck, and water nipples on board of a truck need to be pressed in order for the liquid to come out. This is an example of manually watering or giving milk to unweaned animals, but again, that can only be done with pails and a rubber nipple. So the animals, in this case, unweaned animals, they need to be unloaded from the vehicle to be provided with food and liquid during the journey. Since years, the NGO inspectors have been warning authorities of the difficulty of providing nutrients and liquids to unweaned animals on long-distance journeys. We've seen many calves in particular that have died during long-distance journeys or that arrive in very poor shape, and we all know that the antibiotic consumption in the veal industry is one of the highest because they are such fragile animals. Their immune systems aren't even fully developed until roughly 4 to 5 weeks of age, and yet they're going on long-distance journeys already at 14 days of age. So in 2009, the European Commission had already sent out a letter to competent authorities across member states, warning them of the fact that indeed metal nipples or troughs alone should never be considered as being adapted for the drinking of unweaned animals. Only pails with rubber flexible teats should be considered. And again, that can only be done when the animals are unloaded in order to make sure every unweaned animal gets an appropriate amount of feed. So what's the solution to this? When you're approving a vehicle, when you're giving it a certificate of approval for transport of long distance, it's important to indicate limitations regarding which category can go on board. So here in this slide, we show what to fill in. Indicate in point 2, not suitable for unweaned animals. But metal water nipples are not only not adequate or not suitable for unweaned animals, they're also not suitable for adult cattle. Here's a video showing why. To approve a vehicle for the use of adult cattle, then, it's important that it be installed with appropriate water troughs for adult cattle. Those are the larger troughs, not metal nipples, but larger troughs with adequate water pressure that are often found in the corners of the vehicle, in the front and back corners, and sometimes in the middle if 3 compartments are being created. Here again are some photos of nipple systems that are not suitable for cattle. Again, on the top right, it's the same as we've shown you before. It's a metal nipple, but installed on a different angle. That is not suitable for larger cattle because they cannot press the nipple and their mouths are too large. They need to be able to have a large trough to get their full heads in and suck up the water. On the bottom as well, they cannot manipulate such a little nipple as well. The trough is not deep enough. Here's a good example. There's the trough is deep enough to collect enough water for them to suck up into their mouths. The water pressure was very good, and the size of the trough was large enough to allow the whole bovine to get its head in. That's also very important. We see some troughs that are being built, like this one in this slide, where the trough is not very wide, but a big problem is that they're being built with a flap to protect the water from becoming dirty. So it's a flap that stays in front of the water trough to stop manure from piling in, and the animal, the bovine, has to press that flap inwards in order to access the water. But what happens is that the flap takes up a lot of space, so the forehead of the animal can't get fully in. You'll see that on the right-hand side of this slide. But we've had a talk with the manufacturers of these vehicles, and they've now built the flap so that it's got 2 compartments. It can fold at the top, allowing more depth for the forehead of the bovine to get in. And here you see the new design. It's still not ideal, but it at least provides a bit more space for the animal to access the water. This video shows clearly why it's vital that truckers also provide water manually to cattle during long-distance journeys, because as I was saying earlier, when there's 1 or 2 automatic water troughs in the compartment, it's often the dominant animals that monopolize them, and they don't let the submissive ones approach. Or sometimes the submissive ones are in a corner far away from the water system and physically can't approach the water troughs. So manually, the truck driver can check that each one got water and place the buckets literally in front of each one's face.
They should get a second one in here.
A best practice when you check on livestock vehicles before giving them their approval is to check that each one is equipped with a sufficient number of adequate manual water troughs on board, as well as a ladder. Only that way can the truck driver give water manually to the animals. A ladder so that he can reach the ones on the top deck, and buckets or proper troughs. They should be very long troughs so more than one animal can drink at the same time due to social facilitation. Be on the vehicle at all times.
The water system needs to be adequate to the species and, of course, also to the category of the animals transported. In this slide, you see 2 different water systems. The green arrow is indicating the water system that works and can be used fine with the adult bovine animals. It is deep enough and large enough to accommodate all sizes of the mouth of the bovines. So this vehicle can be authorized, if we just look at the water system, for the transport of adult bovine animals. However, the yellow arrow is indicating a water system that is not suitable to be used by pigs or even by ovines or caprines, because the construction of the water system is such that, according to the anatomy of the pig mouth, or for example of the sheep or goat mouth, they cannot use it. When the animals would press such a water system, the water would come out and they could lick the water on the side. But of course, this is not adequate for watering of the animals on board of the vehicle.
Yeah, indeed. There's not enough water coming out. It would literally just be licking up droplets that collect on the sides.
This water system can be used for pigs. And I can tell you that according to my experience, the price for the exchanging of the little button that we saw before to this nipple is literally in cents, euro cents. This is not a really huge investment by the transport company to have adequate water nipples.
But what about for poultry? Well, the European legislation requires that poultry not be transported for longer than 12 hours unless they've got access to water. There are certain companies now that are bringing spent hens and also breeding poultry further than 12 hours, and they've now installed this sort of water nipple system, as you can see in the photo. It's unclear whether the competent authorities are going to accept it. It's in a new phase, but we have concerns because this is the way poultry are transported in very crowded conditions. And it seems impossible for the birds in the back of the crate or the container to reach the water nipple that's placed along the sides of the containers. So if the animals cannot physically reach the water, then it cannot be considered as adequately designed to provide free access to all animals on board. So it's not just a problem of the system needing to be designed according to the mouth and anatomy of the animals, but also that there be an adequate number of water devices on board.
Okay, let's move on to the further requirements. In Article 3, now letter G, is specified. Sufficient floor area and height is provided for the animals appropriate to the size and the intended journey. In Chapter 4 of the Annex 3, where the formula for the certificate of approval for means of transport for long journeys, it is specified in point 3 that the surface area per square meters should be entered.
So the surface area per deck needs to be indicated in this form, but what is included in surface area? In many of the so-called cattle cruisers, the wheel cap is protruding from the floor. And this area should not be included in the total surface area available to the animals. So on the form, you need to deduct this amount of space from the total surface area on the deck. Why is that? As you can see in this photo, on the yellow arrow, where the protruding wheel cap is showing, the animals cannot use that space. It's uncomfortable to lie down on, but also they cannot stand on it. You'll see that on the cow in the photo, that she's got her hind legs not on the wheel cap, but to the side of it. So make sure to subtract that space. Here as well, on a truck with gilts loaded on it, you'll notice they're all lying down except for on that area where the wheel cap is protruding. Some of the cattle cruisers being built should not really be considered cattle cruisers for large adult cattle, because the wheel caps are such that they're eating up the width of the available space on the deck. So not only should you deduct that space, obviously, because the animals can't stand there, but because large adult cattle cannot stand perpendicular to the side walls of the truck, because the width is not wide enough for them to stand in that way. Only smaller bovine should be loaded on such a vehicle. If not, the larger animals are stuck with their faces or their butts facing the cabin or the back ramp of the vehicle and not to the sides of the truck, which is the direction that cattle like to stand in, especially because then they have access to fresh air. If they're standing with their faces facing the solid wall of these wheel caps, then they're not getting any fresh air. But physically, they can also not fit in that direction. Here's a photo showing you a cattle cruiser used with large cattle. That's unacceptable. You'll see that the cattle are standing without their faces to the sides and not able to get fresh air. This is particularly a problem during the hot summer months. This is just a drawing we made to further explain our point, showing that cattle cannot stand in their preferred direction during transport. And it's important to keep in mind as well that bovine are not flexible. They're a little bit like a ladder. You cannot bend them in half. So spaces where animals cannot fit in because of their physiology should not be included in the total surface area that you indicate on the certificate of means of approval for the vehicle. So what we suggest is in the form on point 2, set clear limitations to which species type and category can be safely transported in the means of transport. In the case with the large wheel caps that take up the width, indicate here only for young bovine, not for adults. As well, measure each deck yourself to be sure that the surface area indicated in the form is correct, and subtract all surface area taken up by equipment.
Back to the certificate of approval for means of transport for long journeys. As it's stated in Annex 1 of Chapter 6, in point 3.3, means of transport by road must be fitted with a temperature monitoring system as well with the means of recording such data. This record shall be dated and made available to the competent authority upon request. So this is very important because, as you all know, the journey is not just taking place at this moment of the inspection, but it's a long, many times, several days lasting journey. So when the temperature requirement is checked, it is very important that the competent authority can see and compare the temperature that the animals were exposed to during the journey. For this, the equipment, in order to print out and to be available to the competent authority, must be on the vehicle and must be in such a condition that they can actually show what was the temperature during different phases, stages, hours of the journey. And this is also the legal basis for it. Temperature sensors must be placed in such a position to indicate the correct, the realistic temperature inside the transport vehicles. And of course, the temperature sensors must be placed on all the levels. So if you do approve a transport vehicles that can be used on many levels, please make sure that the temperature sensors are on each level of the vehicle. Before you approve the vehicle, of course, it is very important to make sure that the sensors are actually working. How can you do this? It's a very simple method. You just expose a temperature sensor, many of them, not just one, inside the vehicle to a source of heat. A source of heat which is very easy to use is, for example, a lighter. And then with the help of the temperature measuring device, which can print out the different temperatures at different times, this means hourly times, and which is dated, then you can compare the difference in temperature, that is inside the lorry when you check it, and then the temperature, the rise of the temperature when the sensors are exposed to heat. In the regulation, there is not a direct requirement that the temperature monitoring system must be inside the driver's cabin, but there is a requirement that the driver or the attendant must be alerted where the allowed range of the temperature is exceeded. So when you check the temperature sensors, if they work when you expose them to the extreme heat, like the one of the lighter, then please also check that this is then transferred to the monitoring system, which is usually placed inside the driver's cabin.
In addition, check that the alarm actually goes off when the temperature has exceeded the range allowed by the EU legislation. So if it goes above 30 degrees, an alarm should go off to warn the driver so he knows he needs to stop and take action to protect the welfare of the animals on board. For the transport of small animals such as rabbits and poultry, there's no requirement in the EC 1/2005 legislation stating that the vehicle has to be equipped with temperature sensors, a temperature alarm system, or a monitor. However, in the legislation, it is still indicated for the transport of small animals that the containers need to protect the animals from inclement weather, extreme temperatures, and adverse changes in climatic conditions. In practice, this is done with the use of tarps that can be rolled down to protect the small animals that are loaded in the containers. It's important to check that these tarps that are installed on the vehicles for small animals be long enough to fully protect animals also on the lower levels. In this case, you see clearly, and also in the next slide, that the tarp did not go down all the way to the bottom row. And as a result, these animals were all found frozen to death. Here is another poultry truck that we stopped in the winter where the tarp did not reach the bottom of the deck. So a solution to this, and what you must check for, is that the vehicle is equipped with tarps that go down all the way to the bottom, and the best practice is that the vehicle be equipped with 2 different types of tarps that can at any moment be rolled down to protect the animals from cold, rain, and sun. In this case, the yellow arrow represents the tarp used for very cold conditions. It's solid. It protects the animals also from wind. And the one seen by the green arrow is used for warmer days to protect the animals from rain, but also from sun rays. And the ideal situation is having both permanently installed on the vehicle because, of course, in the spring and in the fall, there are moments during the day and night that are very, very cold, but also very warm. And having double systems always available means the truck driver can change it at right on the spot.
As of 1st of January 2007, all vehicles must be equipped with a navigation system. The navigation system must allow recording and providing information which are equivalent to those mentioned in the journey log as referred to Annex 2, Section 4. In order for the navigation or satellite navigation system to be able to replace the journey log, it is very important that the vehicles that are authorized have a possibility of the direct unload at any time of the journey from the onboard unit in order for the competent authority to be able to check the data on the satellite navigation system.
Just to add what Taya mentioned, in the part highlighted in blue on this slide, you see that that the purpose of this navigation system, the satellite navigation system, is so that eventually the journey log, the paperwork, can be replaced or can at least be backed up by data. And this data found on the satellite system on board the truck needs to somehow be accessible by the software available to the competent authorities at any time during the journey. So the laptop that you see in the highlighted blue area is the competent authority behind a screen who's accessing the data collected by the satellite navigation system on board the livestock truck, where he can see, for example, what time those animals were loaded on, how long they were going, what the temperature was like for the animals. And he has to be able to check this at any point during the journey. that's the correct navigation system, and it's important to check on that. We've hoped that you've enjoyed this training video and that it's explained some things that may have been confusing in the past. We really hope that in the future the means of approval are correctly filled in to avoid any kind of welfare problems further down the road, literally. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can contact Eyes on Animals via their website page. We've got a contact section in it, but also on our website we've got industry tips where you can find out more information about truck design and correct water systems, etc. So thank you very much for listening on behalf of Eyes on Animals.
Also, I would like to add to Leslie's thank you for listening to this video presentation about the certification for the issuing of the approval for means of transport for long journeys. I really hope that it was useful, that you got a lot of good tips and good practical examples on how the vehicle design does directly affect the welfare of the animals transported and can be seen later on the journey. Please do not hesitate to contact us on our web address, which is indicated in yellow at the top of this slide. For any further information that you require on the training courses that Animal Welfare Foundation and Eyes on Animals is providing, please do write an email to the following email address and visit us on our Facebook site. Leslie?
Thank you.
Bye.